Let's dive right in. Most of us probably don't think about the state all that much. It's just the government, right? It's always been there. But today, we're going to explore a really provocative idea based on the work of Jacob Poynton, that the state as we know it wears a mask. And we're going to try and see what's behind it. You know, we're generally taught to see the state as this kind of neutral referee. It's got a rule book, which is the law, and its job is to make sure we all play fair. It's supposed to stand above all the messy conflicts of our daily lives, protecting our rights and just keeping things in order. But the analysis we're digging into today asks a really challenging question. What if that referee isn't neutral at all? What if its main purpose is actually to make sure one specific team always wins, while just convincing everybody else that the game is fair?
And this is the state's public face, right? This is its official story. It projects its image of politics as a separate, almost sacred space, a place where all our economic squabbles disappear and we can all come together as equals, guided by these big, universal ideas.
The source material we're looking at calls this the bourgeois state. And here's the absolute core of the argument. It's not separate from the economy at all. It's seen as the political shell that a society built on private property and class division needs in order to exist. It's not an option, it's a necessity for that system.
So, to pull back that mask on the state, this critique says we first have to look in the mirror, because it argues that in this modern world, every single one of us is living a kind of double life.
The central idea here is that this system literally splits us in two. We become two different people, often with completely opposite interests. And understanding this split, well, that's supposedly the key to understanding how the whole thing works.
So, on one side, we have the citoyen. That's French for the citizen. This is our public self. When we walk into a voting booth, we are all in theory equal. One person, one vote. But the second we leave and step into the economy, we become the bourgeois, the private person, driven by self-interest, forced to compete in a marketplace where we are absolutely not equal.
And here's the punchline of that whole idea. The formal, legal equality we have as a citoyen isn't real freedom. According to this view, it's an ideological mask that's there to hide the actual, real-world economic inequality we experience every single day.
Okay, so if our political rights are just a mask, what exactly is it hiding? According to this analysis, it's hiding the real power that actually runs our society: property.
From this perspective, the real foundation of the modern state isn't high-minded ideals like justice or democracy. Nope. It's the sacred, almost religious, untouchable principle of private property. This is the hidden king that all the other laws, in the end, have to serve.
Now, it's really, really important we're clear on what property means in this context. We're not talking about your phone or your toothbrush. The critique is aimed at capitalist property. Think of it as a social relationship that excludes people. It's the ownership of the factory, the land, the resources, the things people need to live. And because it's enforced by law, it gives the owner direct power over the lives of everyone else who has to get access to that property to survive.
So how do we get here? How did this system get set up? Well, the story we're often told is one of, thrift and smarts and peaceful agreements, but this analysis argues that the real history, well, it's a whole lot bloodier.
The source argues this system was born in an explosion of violence, a process Marx called primitive accumulation. It happened in stages. First, you have the enclosure of the commons. Common lands people had used for centuries to survive were fenced off and privatized. Step 2, the people living there were violently kicked off that land. They were dispossessed of their very means of survival. Then the state came in and criminalized their old ways of life. Suddenly, things like foraging or squatting were crimes. And what's the end result? You've created a brand new class of people, the free worker, who are now free to do only one thing: go sell their labor to the new property owners or starve.
So if the state was born out of this violent process, and its job is to protect this new property system, what does it actually do day to day? Well, the argument is that its real job isn't to be a neutral referee, but to be an active, hands-on manager for capital.
From this point of view, the state's job has a few key parts. You've got the obvious stuff, the hard power functions: guaranteeing property rights, enforcing contracts, and, of course, managing dissent to keep a lid on any conflict. But then there's the soft power stuff, which is maybe even more important. Things like reproducing a healthy, educated workforce through public schools and healthcare. And, crucially, making the whole system seem legitimate by framing it as a series of voluntary exchanges. It even builds all the infrastructure, like roads and ports, that essentially subsidize private companies.
And this quote just captures that central contradiction so perfectly. In the eyes of the law, a CEO and one of their factory workers are equals. They're both just citizens. But that abstract legal equality completely ignores the massive real-world power difference, the fact that one of them commands vast resources and the labor of thousands, and the other doesn't.
So, where does this all lead? I mean, if you follow the logic of this analysis, that the state is fundamentally just a tool for managing a class-divided society, then you end up at a conclusion that is, well, it's pretty radical, to say the least.
The argument basically concludes that you can't just reform your way out of this. If the state is just a symptom of a deeper problem, the system of private property and class itself, then achieving real human freedom means you have to abolish the root cause. You have to get rid of the very conditions that make the state necessary in the first place.
So, what would that even look like? The theorized path to get there has three main stages. First, a revolutionary break, a complete rupture with the current state. That's followed by a transitional period, with a new, temporary kind of state, run by the working class. Its job isn't to protect private property, but to systematically dismantle it. And as it succeeds, as class divisions start to dissolve, the state itself is supposed to become obsolete and just gradually wither away.
This classic quote from Marx and Engels really gets at that final goal. When class differences are finally gone, the public power will lose its political character. What that means is, it stops being a weapon for one class to dominate another. It loses its coercive, political edge.
So the ultimate vision is a total transformation of what governance even means. It stops being about power, about rules, about the domination of people by other people. Instead, it becomes the simple, practical, collective task of managing our shared resources, what's called the administration of things.
So, after this whole journey, after unmasking the state, questioning the citizen, and digging all the way down to the violent roots of property, we're left with this. This entire analysis forces us to try and imagine a world that is fundamentally different from our own. It's a hugely provocative thought, and it leaves us with what is maybe the biggest question of all. What would a world without the state as we know it truly look like?